regardless of where they lived.
And to a lot of housing advocates we talked to for this story, this second explanation seemed really plausible. In a lot of places, there was this whole screening process to get into the new Hope 6 developments. Some people who had lived in the old housing projects simply weren't allowed to move into the new buildings.
And for Raj and Matt and the other researchers, this presented a real problem because it wasn't random who moved into the new Hope 6 housing. Economists call this selection bias. It was possible that the reason kids in Hope 6 were doing better as adults was, like Matt said, just that they were always going to do better, no matter where they lived.
To get around this problem, the team went back to an idea from earlier studies, an idea about how neighborhoods shape the way kids' lives turn out.
The way that neighborhoods influence people operates through kind of an exposure or dosage model. So in other words, what the literature on neighborhoods has shown us is that the influence that a neighborhood has on you is proportional to the amount of time that you spend growing up in that neighborhood.
The team had data on how long people lived in Hope 6 developments as kids. And it turned out you saw a way bigger impact on the kids who were there for a long time versus just a year or two. You could see that dosage idea in the data.
Each additional year that a child spends in one of these Hope 6 revitalized projects increases their earning by almost 3%.
So yeah, it looked like Hope 6 caused better outcomes, but it could still be the case that families who stayed a long time in Hope 6 were just different from the families who stayed a short while.
Yeah, maybe those families who left super quickly were somehow less stable, and that was why their kids saw less benefit than the kids in families who stayed put. And this is where they made this move in the research. That is honestly just so clever. I'm going to give it like official Planet Money tip of the hat.
Ooh, Planet Money tip of the hat. That's a huge award, Keith.
So what they did is they went ahead and compared the dosage effect within families by looking at siblings who both lived in Hope 6 housing, but for different amounts of time.
Consider a family that has an 8-year-old and an 18-year-old, and they move into one of these revitalized public housing projects. The younger sibling should earn more later in life compared to their older sibling who only spends a year in the public housing project. That's exactly what we find in the data.
Okay, so yes, they were now pretty confident that what they were seeing in the data was real, that there was something about growing up in the new Hope 6 public housing that made a big difference. But to be able to use their findings to shape policy going forward, they really needed to sort of hone in on what was actually causing this improvement in outcomes.
Because if it was about just improving the physical housing itself, you'd want to put all your money into that. Or if it was about the whole mixing incomes idea, just do that. Or maybe it was about some third thing that they weren't even thinking of.
Basically, it wasn't clear what part of Hope 6 exactly was causing the big difference in outcomes. At some point, Matt started explaining this puzzle to Carol Naughton, a woman he knew who ran a big housing nonprofit.
I remember talking to her and saying, look, we find these big gains, but we want to go beyond just understanding that the program work and say something about why it works so that we could potentially kind of scale up this type of intervention.
Carol's from Atlanta, and she told Matt that she had noticed that not all Hope 6 sites in Atlanta were the same, that some of them did much better than others.
And in her experience, it was the sites that were located near more economic opportunity, near more affluent areas where there were some economic resources to tap into. That's where she thought that the program was most successful.
And Matt was like, what if we went back over our data and grouped Hope 6 developments according to how well off the neighborhoods around them were?
And so, out of that discussion, we took that, back to the data and looked in the data, and that's exactly what we found, and turned out to be kind of a key turning point in our ability to figure out what was actually going on in terms of driving the mechanisms.
So just to underline a little bit what Matt is saying here, not all Hope 6 developments were created equal as far as this whole income mixing idea went. If a Hope 6 development was near richer neighborhoods, the kids in public housing there tended to do really well. If surrounding neighborhoods were poor though, the kids in Hope 6 development saw no gains.
It's only in cases where the kids who live nearby had better outcomes, were from more affluent families, do we really see meaningful gains in the program.
This strongly suggests that Hope 6 caused better outcomes, not because it improved the housing or got rid of lead paint or whatever. It suggests that these new neighborhoods fostered more social integration between kids from different backgrounds. When that crucial ingredient was missing, the Hope 6 kids did not see better outcomes.
And they were even able to show that the Hope 6 kids really were interacting more with the more well-off kids. They were more connected to each other on Facebook and more likely to live together as adults.
And that is what appeared to be central in driving the long-run gains in their outcomes.
So it's not the architecture, it's like who you're interacting with.
not the architecture per se that generated these gains.
Now, this is all pretty astounding. Low-income kids do way better when they interact with or are friends with higher-income kids. This is a crucial finding in their paper, and it left us wondering, why? So we asked Raj, why would these social interactions matter?
So that's actually something I want to drill down on, and I realize this is in some ways beyond the scope of the paper, but it feels like a really present question, which is, what are the possible stories for why that's occurring?
Yeah. So 3 different mechanisms through which we think connections matter for kids' outcomes.
They don't have clear data on this, but Raj has some theories. Theory number 1 is about how people get jobs.
If you're connected to somebody who's got a good job at a high-paying firm, you're more likely to get that job. And so cross-class interaction just directly affects the internships you get, the career you might end up pursuing.
Theory number 2 is about information. Information that you might get by hanging out with your higher income friends or their families.
You get information from people who are exposed to different things. If you live near somebody whose parents went to a college, you might be more likely to think about applying to that college. You've at least heard of it.
Raj's last theory is the one he personally finds the most compelling, and it's about what kids think is even possible for themselves.
I think people's aspirations and what they try to achieve themselves are greatly shaped by who they're around, especially as they grow up. I can say that from my own personal experience. I grew up in a family of academics, certainly greatly influenced by that in my own career choices. And I think, conversely, kids who have never had exposure to science, never had exposure to people pursuing higher education, pursuing business, and so on, may just not see themselves. They may not even know where to start in terms of pursuing those opportunities. And so I think that's a really central reason that these kinds of interactions likely matter.
Now, there's a part of me that reads a study like this and is like, this is great. We did it. We have an answer now for how to reduce poverty, how to cause upward mobility. We're done. But then it never seems to work out quite that cleanly in the real world. So next, we're going to talk about how we're actually doing as a country at putting the ideas from this study into practice. And we're going to go back to Ianuarie, who raised her own son in a Hope 6 development, to see what she thinks about the study. All of that after the break. Okay, so there are a few things you need to understand about Hope 6, this program that really changed outcomes for kids who grew up in public housing. The first is that it doesn't exist anymore. Funding for the Hope 6 program ended 14 years ago.
In part because of some legitimate criticisms of how Hope 6 was implemented. The biggest criticism was that it knocked down a ton of public housing that it didn't replace. Almost 100,000 units were demolished, but only 55,000 public housing units were built back in their place. Tens of thousands of families were functionally kicked out of public housing by Hope 6.
Raj and Matt made it very clear that it would actually be a mistake to read their research as a recommendation to just resurrect Hope 6.
Our analysis definitely does not kind of endorse Hope 6 as a program. I think concerns around displacement should be taken very seriously, and so if one was trying to understand whether Hope 6 is a good or a bad policy, you'd really want to think seriously about how to weigh the benefits that we're estimating in our paper against the kind of displacement it costs, which we have not tried to quantify in any real way.
So yeah, Hope 6, it had some big issues, but it also integrated low-income kids with high-income kids, and that had a really positive impact on their future outcomes. Raj and Matt think that finding, it matters for a lot more than just public housing. The country as a whole, it seems to be growing more and more economically segregated.
About half of low-income neighborhoods are just as socially isolated as Hope 6 projects were prior to revitalization.
As part of their research, they built an interactive map that lets you zoom in on 1,500 different neighborhoods around the country that could benefit from something like Hope 6. These neighborhoods with concentrated poverty that could be better connected to more affluent neighborhoods nearby.
Ross says there are still federal programs that try to revitalize low-income neighborhoods, but they're underfunded and not designed as well as they could be.
I think we could be doing more in terms of housing policy to create opportunities. I think we could be both spending money that we're already spending, which is $70 billion a year on various affordable housing programs, more effectively, and we could potentially expand certain programs and design them better to improve outcomes.
And he says we could help low-income kids connect to higher-income kids in all these other ways too, through schools and sports and even the way we design mass transit. The policy choices don't only have to be about housing.
But they have that same effect of creating that interaction that really seems to be the key mechanism through which Hope 6 had an effect.
So, how does all this look to someone who actually lived through it? I asked Ianuarie, the woman who showed me around the Richard Allen homes, what she made of this study, because she has this really interesting perspective on the changes that came with Hope 6. She moved into a new Hope 6 building when she was 19. Her childhood happened in the old version of Richard Allen homes. She says almost all her friends growing up were from there. But her son, he grew up in the new version. Do you feel like your childhood was different from his childhood?
Yes.
How?
Educational wise, living wise, just growing up.
Waisina says her son always did what he was told. He was kind of a rule follower. He was really into Legos and electronics as a kid.
My son is a weirdo, and I love it. When I say not street smart at all, but he loves like taking that leap.
And she says he met kids from all over, including kids who lived outside of public housing. And yeah, some of them had parents who were better off financially.
Do you think that had any impact on his life?
Yes, I really do.
Waisina's son graduated from high school about a decade ago.
My son is 29. 18, he went to Penn State.
He was there for a year, then he moved on to a trade school.
All on his own. I mean, not saying me and his dad didn't help out financially, but him doing it himself, knowing what he wanted.
The idea that kids who grow up in better public housing, in mixed income neighborhoods, that they would have a better chance of getting out of poverty, Waisina buys it.
Well, yes, they will. Because the atmosphere, the surroundings. Because you're coming from a mentality where you're caged in, where now you're not. So yes, I do agree, yes. They will make more, they will succeed, yes.
Waisina's son turns 30 this year, the age Raj's team looked at to see how Hope 6 kids' economic lives turned out. Her son, he's engaged, he's got a steady job, driving a semi-truck, and he's studying to get certified as an HVAC technician. If you want to learn more about the study in this show, Greg also wrote an amazing Planet Money newsletter about it that does an incredible deep dive on the research. You can sign up for that at npr.org/planetmoneynewsletter.
Planet Money, we're also putting out a book, and we're going on a book tour. You can see us in person in April. We're going coast to coast. Details at planetmoneybook.com.
Today's episode was produced by Luis Gallo with help from Sam Yellowhorse Kessler. It was edited by Jess Jang, fact-checked by Ianuarie, and engineered by Jimmy Keeley. Alex Goldmark is our executive producer.
Special thanks to Larry Vale. I'm Greg Rosalsky.
And I'm Keith Romer. This is NPR. Thanks for listening. Big news, Planet Money listeners. Planet Money is going on tour to promote our first ever book. It's going to come out in April. We will be celebrating in about a dozen cities around the country. And because it's public radio, there will be a limited edition tote bag that is included with your ticket while supplies last. Details, dates, and how to get your ticket are at planetmoneybook.com, or you can click the link in the show notes.
This is Planet Money from NPR.
It is hard to buy a house. It has been hard to buy a house for a while now. And the other day, I heard a story of someone who I think might have gone further than anyone else in that quest. James Lawrence.
James is your classic New Hampshire guy. He likes the cold, likes the mountains, and he likes his girlfriend's cats.
Lorelai and Rory.
Love it, Lorelai.
And yes, they are named after the Gilmore Girls.
Amazing.
In 2019, James was in a bit of a tough spot, housing-wise.
Yeah, James is in the National Guard.
Yes, sir.
You definitely do not have to call me sir, by the way.
It's just how we talk.
And the reason he was in a tough spot was because recently he'd gone off to do this National Guard officer training all the way in Missouri. And while he was away, he'd given up his apartment to save money.
Which makes sense, but when he came back...
My $900 a month apartment in Portsmouth had gone up to $1,500, $1,600, $1,700 a month in the city, and I'd gotten priced out.
So James, like many people these days, moved back in with his parents. But they were far away, like hours from his school and his job at the front desk of a hotel. And so, in the fall, he had an idea. Instead of trekking hours every day,
I rented a campsite where I just set up one of my tents, and I was literally living out of my car while going to work, while being in the National Guard, while going to school.
This was okay for a little bit, but one night, James was sitting around the campfire.
And I was probably on my second IPA when I realized, like, what am I doing? Like, this is ridiculous.
It was right then and there that James had a realization that many, many people have had before. He was going to get a place of his own. He was going to get a mortgage. He was going to spend his money not on rent, but on his future.
So I was like, oh, yeah, this is great. I'm just going to buy a condo. It's going to be great. You know, I have a little bit of money. I have the VA loan option.
But then, like many bright-eyed and bushy-tailed prospective homeowners, he met the reality of the real estate market.
Oh, there's listings. Oh, that's something I can't afford. Or that's an hour away. Or that, you know, it needs work.
The main sticking point, though, was the down payment. He just didn't have enough to compete.
And then it got worse. COVID hit, the housing market went wild. Rich Bostonians were coming to New Hampshire paying all cash.
Yeah, now there was no way James could compete. Unless he somehow figured out how to get his hands on a wicked big down payment.
So he came up with a kind of extreme plan. Get deployed. Because the money's really good, and if he went someplace a little bit dangerous, it could also include hazard pay. Cherry on top, all that he earned would be tax-free.
And you know what? He did it.
I am currently stationed in just outside Djibouti City, Djibouti, on the east coast of Africa.
You shipped off to Djibouti to afford the down payment to a house.
Yes, sir. 100%.
Hello and welcome to Planet Money. I'm Erica Barris.
And I'm Nick Fountain. Housing is too expensive. It's pushing people to extremes. Democrats have noticed this, noticed that talking about it plays well with voters. And now, in this midterm election year, President Donald Trump seems to be focused on it too.
Yeah, his administration has recently started talking more about affordability. And they're taking action with 2 new initiatives that aim to make buying a house easier.
Today on the show, we're going to take a close look at those 2 moves and ask, will they work? For James and for all of us. James's story might be the most extreme example of someone trying to get into the housing market that I've heard. Like shipping off to Djibouti to get that tax-free pay, he fought for that.
100%. It fought hard. Like, I had to get waivers and meet with colonels and get doctor's approvals.
But James doesn't actually think what he's doing is that extreme. When he tells his fellow millennial friends about the lengths he's going to buy a house, they're all like,
Yep, that sounds about right.
Sounds about right?
Yeah.
Shipping off to Djibouti to afford a down payment for a house sounds about right?
Yeah, they're like, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. If you look at the median age of first-time homebuyers these days, it's at an all-time high, 40 years old, James's age. In the early 90s, it was 28 years old.
Now, President Trump has said he does not want to bring the price of existing homes down. Because for everyone who already owns a home, that is a significant part of their wealth, and he doesn't want to hurt them.
Yes. In fact, yesterday Trump said he, quote, wants to drive housing prices up for people that own their homes.
We're going to keep them wealthy. We're going to keep those prices up. We're not going to destroy the value of their homes so that somebody that didn't work very hard can buy a home. We're going to get...
Still, a White House spokesperson told us that the president is committed to exploring every tool possible to improve housing affordability.
And the housing affordability proposal that the Trump administration has attached the most fanfare and details to is about leveling the playing field.
Yeah, it has to do with a premise that you have likely heard, that big Wall Street investors are buying up single-family homes, and those deep-pocketed investors are impossible to compete with. Of all the popular ideas out there on why housing prices are so high, this is a big one. In the world of politics, it's been mostly a thing you've heard from politicians on the left, though.
But last week, President Trump signed an executive order. I have it pulled up right here. It is called Stopping Wall Street from Competing with Main Street Homebuyers. And last week, at his big speech in Davos, he talked directly to those Wall Streeters.
Many of you are here. Many of you are good friends of mine. Many of you are supporters. Sorry to do this to you. I'm so sorry. But you've driven up housing prices by purchasing hundreds of thousands of single-family homes.
So we wanted to find out, will this policy help people like James when he gets back from Djibouti this summer?
To figure that out, we needed to understand how many houses institutional investors are actually buying, what they're doing with them, and how that's affecting prices. So we called up Caitlin Gorbach, who co-wrote one of the first economics research papers looking at this.
How you doing?
I'm doing well. It's been a crazy week to see my research suddenly so timely and relevant, but I don't regret it.
Yes, timely and relevant. In fact, the day we talked to her, Caitlin was getting ready to fly to Washington, D.C. to talk about her paper in front of Treasury Department economists.
But that was on the schedule before any of these policies came out.
Do you think the room is going to be more full given recent news?
I don't know. You'll have to follow up with me on that next week.
Caitlin started looking into the subject when she got her first professor job at UT Austin. It was 2022, on the heels of the pandemic and one of the sharpest rises in housing costs ever. And she and one of her co-authors were having lunch, talking about how so many people were blaming big institutional investors, these giant Wall Street firms with access to tons of money, for the bonkers cost of housing.
We were thinking of the perspective of new professors who have no money, could not even hope to buy a home.
Sure.
And so I was thinking, as a renter, this is a huge boon.
A boon, a good thing, because institutional investors weren't just buying up houses and sitting on them, they were converting them into rentals, which meant there were more rentals out there for people like Caitlin, more supply. So Caitlin thought rents should go down.
With that in mind, Caitlin set out to research the actual impact of these big investors buying up properties on rent prices and on home prices.
And the first thing she needed to figure out was, Was this even happening on a large scale? Like, how much housing had these big investors bought up?
So she started sorting through a database of basically all home sales in the US for more than a decade. Like every home that was sold. And then tried to figure out who were the buyers of the greatest number of homes. She sorted by most frequent buyer.
Collapsed by name.
And it came up with...
Wait for it.
Like John Smith. Yeah.
Yes, of course, the biggest homeowner in America by name is not Landlords R Us or some Wall Street company. It is James or Michael or Robert Smith.
Finding all the homes that big institutional investors had bought up was going to be harder than that. It was going to take some sleuthing, like maybe hundreds of hours searching corporate records, looking through legal filings, trying to identify the big landlords, and then trace them to their cryptically named shell companies that were buying houses.
It's like code breaking and investigative journalism.
Yes. Let's make a movie about you guys.
Yeah, who would play me? Not Nicolas Cage, but this does feel like his genre.
In the end, and we should mention this is a working paper, not officially published yet, and only includes data through 2022, she calculated the share of all housing units owned by these big Wall Street firms.
Yeah, so to the best of our abilities, right, acknowledging that we probably didn't find every single home, the ownership share as of 2022 is about 0.3% of all housing units in the United States.
Very small.
Quite small, yes.
That's of all housing units. If you look at all the single-family homes and townhomes for rent, almost 3% are owned by big institutional investors.
The percentage goes higher if you look at just purchases instead of ownership. Caitlin found that from 2010 to 2022, institutional investors were responsible for 5% of single-family and townhome purchases nationwide.
But, and this is important, she found a lot of geographic concentration. Areas where these Wall Street companies have bought a lot more